The death of Vladimir Lenin in 1924 left the Soviet Union in tears and a fierce power struggle within the Bolshevik Party.
By 1928, Joseph Stalin emerged as the leader of the Soviet Union, getting support through his aims and priorities for the USSR. Included in such aims was his idea of socialism in one country, calling for socialism to be developed within Russia instead of focusing on spreading the revolution to other countries, having the permanent revolution which was supported by both Lenin and Trotsky. Due to his aims, Stalin reorganized the Communist International Group to center around protecting the Soviet state, a sole communist country in a world of blooming capitalist ones. We see how this view of socialism in one country and fear of invasion had shaped their aims and interactions with other countries.
Once in power, Stalin put his best efforts into bringing Russia out of its social and economic backwardness. Stalin described the situation best, saying, "We are 50 to 100 years behind the advanced countries." He stressed these aims of modernization and rapid improvement, stating, "Either we industrialize or they crush us." Alone in a hostile capitalist world, with Russia in dire need of improvement and protection, it is clear that the internal situation of the USSR was at the forefront of Stalin's mind, especially when dealing with foreign policy.
His domestic policies were mainly driven by the desire to make the USSR a global superpower, using collectivization and the 5-year plans to carry out the tasks necessary to bring up the USSR's status as a global economic and military power, moving the Soviet Union towards Stalin's vision of an ideal socialist state. We can see how these largely influenced the USSR's foreign policies and affairs, since the emphasis on heavy industry required that grain be exported in order for them to import large amounts of capital. This resulted in the USSR's need to quickly establish good relations with other nations who could provide them with economic help and possibilities for trade.
While Stalin was trying to lead the USSR out of its backwards roots, Adolf Hitler was making a splash in Germany, and by 1933, he had established himself as the leader of the new Nazi Germany. With clear anti-communist intentions, Hitler became one of, if not the biggest, of Stalin's worries, as reflected in the unstable relationship between Nazi Germany and the USSR. Through a series of deals and pacts, the world is not quite sure whether these two nations are friends or enemies. But you know what they say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
In the 1930s, the USSR has established itself as a European power, with no countries united against them, as well as a mutually beneficial Rapallo Treaty with Germany, giving them important diplomatic, military, and economic advantages. Although foreign policies were decided on by Stalin and the Politburo, the Commissar of Foreign Affairs was in charge of reaching out to other nations and delivering policies. With the rise of fascist movements in the 1930s posing a threat to the communist country, Litvinov pushed forward the policy of collective security against fascism, created to unite nations in a collaboration to stop and contain fascist movements. This was carried out through mutual assistance pacts with France and Czechoslovakia, as well as by the Comintern helping to create popular fronts in fascist countries to help fight against it. Similarly, Germany, along with Japan, Italy, and other nations, signed an anti-Comintern pact in 1936 to prevent the rise of and combat against communism. In 1936, as Spain entered in a civil war, the European nations who had previously taken a non-intervention stance began sending support to their allies in Spain. Germany and Italy supported their fascist allies by offering military artillery and support. Stalin, wanting to help France, his ally at the time, only offered little support with military aid to the Republicans in an effort to prevent the rise of fascist Franco, as Stalin feared such a leader would pose a serious threat to the security of the Soviet Union. His efforts, however, were limited, as he remained hesitant because of his commitment to socialism in one country.
Tensions between Germany and other Western powers started to rise rapidly. Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland marked the start of World War II, and Stalin's deep paranoia of both sides left him torn between which powers to support, the Axis or the Allies. Soviet relationships with Britain, France, and Germany at the time were unsteady, and Stalin found it hard to ally with anyone, just as other nations were hesitant to ally with the USSR. In 1939, Britain rejected the proposal of a mutual assistance pact between them and France. Later that year, the Anglo-Soviet negotiations fell through, leading the Soviets to reject any form of alliance with the British. Previous compensations and appeasements to Germany from the West show that in some cases, the Allied powers would choose fascism over the greatly feared communism. In the end, Stalin acted in its best interest, or rather, the Soviet Union's best interest, allying with the nation with whom they would benefit the most, which in this case was Nazi Germany, as they seemed to be the only way of ensuring that the USSR could avoid war with the West. But even though the Soviet Union sided with Germany, Stalin still remarked, "I trust no one, not even myself."
In May of 1939, Molotov was named Commissar of Foreign Affairs, acting as a key figure in both during and post-war negotiations and procedures regarding foreign policy. His appointment can be seen as the USSR's signal in persuading the Germans to ally with them, since Molotov openly favored the improvement of relations with Germany.
The Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty with Germany, also known as the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which calls for the re-establishment of agreements from the Treaty of Berlin signed back in 1926. This new pact also had a secret part, agreements that defined future spheres of influence for Germany and the USSR. Stalin defends the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty by saying that it was needed to prevent attacks on the USSR and stemmed as a result of Western betrayal of the collective security policy when they failed to attack Hitler. However, it can be seen that this treaty was signed largely due to Germany offering more to the USSR than Western countries. Shortly after this pact was signed, Stalin showed his support for Germany, saying, "If, against all expectation, Germany finds itself in a difficult situation, then she can be sure that the Soviet people will come to Germany's aid and will not allow Germany to be strangled. The Soviet Union wants to see a strong Germany, and we will not allow Germany to be thrown to the ground." Though this bold statement would soon be forgotten. On December 8, 1940, Hitler called for a German invasion of the USSR, a decision led by his feelings of anti-Semitism, anti-communism, and the desire to exterminate Jewish Bolshevism. With this decision, Hitler officially broke the Nazi-Soviet pact and severed German relations with the USSR. Stalin was in no way blind to the fact that Nazi-Soviet relations could not last. In fact, he believed that war with Hitler was inevitable. From countless telegrams, informers, and reports warning of Operation Barbarossa, it can be seen that Stalin was very informed of Hitler's traitorous plans, even being told the exact date of the attack. Yet, Stalin was surprised, if not in shock, the day of June 22, 1941, when Operation Barbarossa was put into action. In response to Germany breaking through Soviet barriers, Stalin changed the focus of Soviet policy. He called off efforts with communist alliances in spreading revolution, and rather focused them on defending the home front and ensuring Soviet security. Other war policies included the scorched earth approach to force out their invaders, as well as moving all their heavy industry plants behind the Ural Mountains. This was done in order to keep providing soldiers with the necessary weapons, but to also keep these plants safe from attack. Hitler came into Russia with the intent of crushing the Red Army, and initially they were successful. But they ultimately fell victims to the harsh Russian winters. This crushing weather, along with help from Britain and the USA, enabled the Soviet Union to get the upper hand in the war and in the global stage. Later, when hearing of Hitler's death, Stalin remarked, "So the bastard's dead? Too bad we didn't capture him alive." A far cry from his pre-Barbarossa views.
Nearing the end of World War II, three key world leaders emerged to discuss what was to be done regarding the reorganization following the aftermath of the war. The participants were the Allied powers of Britain, USA, and newly emerged both ally and superpower, the USSR. A series of conferences were held to discuss the terms and policies. The first conference was held in Tehran between November 28th and December 1st in 1943. Here, the Big Three, Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, met to discuss united military strategies against Japan and Germany, as well as to begin discussing post-war decisions. It was during this time that the USSR had joined in the war against Japan.
The second conference was held in Yalta between February 4th and 11th in 1945. It was held to discuss Europe's reorganization after World War II. Each leader came with their different sets of demands. Britain, represented by Churchill, wanted free elections and democracy in Eastern and Central European countries. The United States, represented by Roosevelt, wanted Soviet support in the Pacific War and in the newly created United Nations, whilst the USSR wanted to have a sphere of political influence in Eastern and Central Europe to serve as protection. The final of the three conferences was the Potsdam Conference, held after the end of World War II. But there was no clear, concise decision agreed upon for the post-war reorganization of Europe. Stalin went ahead and seized most of all Eastern and Central European countries, creating the Soviet sphere of influence, more commonly referred to as the Soviet bloc. This bloc served as a strategic tool to protect against the Soviet Union, spread communism to its bordering countries, and sever open contact between the USSR and the rest of the world.
Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Furthermore, it was during the end of these peace conferences that the beginnings of the Cold War took shape. This quote-unquote war was an increasing build of tension between the ideologies and agendas of the United States and the Soviet Union, the two new superpowers at the time. Though there was never an official declaration of war, these powers fought through other means, such as the arms race or even the space race. This tension defined foreign policy for both of these two world powers for decades to come.
Throughout the years of switching between alliances and changing foreign policies, it remains clear that Stalin based his decisions on the internal situation of Russia and what would best benefit his nation. With foreign policy, we can see how Stalin fit the mold of what a leader of a single-party state should be like, and what they should support, as defined by the Frederick-Brzezinski model. In Stalin's case, his policies were greatly affected by the internal needs of the USSR, with his end goal in mind being to achieve socialism in one country, or his ideal state, which is another aspect of the FB model.